and on her
It's a desperate effort for him to protect his political patrons.
The news.
For him.
You're listening to Uptown Radio, but first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Belgian authorities have arrested several people, including a man who may have taken part in both the Brussels attacks last month and the Paris attacks in November. Thierry Wertz, a spokesman for the prosecutor's office, says, as heard here through a CNN interpreter, that Mohamed Abrini was picked up with two other people in Brussels a day after police asked the public to help them find a man seen on surveillance video in a hat and light jacket walking with two of the Brussels bombers.
Inquiry is continuing in order to determine whether Mohamed Abrini was the third person present at the Brussels National Airport attack, named as the man with the hat.
This comes weeks after Salah Abdeslam was arrested. He was believed to be the lone surviving suspect in the Paris attacks until Abrini's arrest today. Officials are investigating an apparent murder-suicide this morning at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland in Texas. Joey Palacios of Texas Public Radio reports the FBI says this was not an act of terrorism.
Officials for Joint Base San Antonio would not immediately confirm the identities of the two men killed or if they were enlisted, stating the investigation is ongoing. 502nd Air Base Commander Brigadier General Bob Labruta confirmed two Glock weapons were found. At 8:40 this morning Central Time, Lackland and a nearby elementary school went into lockdown following reports of an active shooter. A short time later, Bexar County Sheriff officials stated it was believed to be a murder-suicide. Base officials would not confirm that. The lockdown was lifted less than 2 hours later. Daily operations at Lackland are resuming as normal. For NPR News, I'm Joey Palacios in San Antonio.
A Virginia man who spent more than 30 years behind bars for crimes he did not commit is now a free man. The state Supreme Court has exonerated Keith Allen Harward after agreeing that DNA evidence revealed he could not have been the person who killed Jesse Perron and raped his wife in Newport News in 1982. This is NPR News.
In New York, I'm Stephen Bisaha. A judge is set to decide the outcome of the latest battle between Governor Chris Christie and Atlantic City Mayor Don Guardian, whose city is $250 million in debt. Christie wants the money to go to the school system, which is owed more than $30 million.
So
Mayor Don Guardian wants to pay public workers to avoid shutting down non-essential government services. The governor is pushing for a state takeover measure that would allow the state to renegotiate public employee contracts. Assembly Speaker Vincent Prieto introduced compromise legislation, which Christie dismissed as a union protection bill.
It's a desperate effort for him to protect his political patrons.
The next payroll check is scheduled to go out May 6th. Bernie Sanders has wrapped up a rally in Flatbush, but his day's not over yet. He's heading over for another event at 5 in Greenpoint. Meanwhile, Clinton will be meeting privately with the state's teachers union in Rochester. New York primary has been becoming increasingly combative. Earlier this week, Sanders said Clinton wasn't qualified to be president, but walked back his comment on NBC's Today Show this morning.
And on her worst day, she would be an infinitely better president than either of the Republican candidates.
She's qualified.
Of course.
The primary is April 19th. Both Democratic candidates will debate in Brooklyn next Thursday. On the Republican side, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani said he's voting for Donald Trump, but said that it wasn't an endorsement. The good news, New Yorkers are making fewer calls while driving. The bad news, they're switching to texting. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced today that more than 8 times as many tickets have been given out for texting while driving since 2011. Tickets for talking on a cell phone while driving have been nearly cut in half over the same time, though they still outnumber tickets for texting. State police say they're stepping up enforcement, and first-time texting offenders can expect a fine up to $200. It's 46 degrees right now and partly cloudy. Tomorrow, expect rain in the evening and even a chance of snow past midnight. Stephen Bisaha, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Susie Shea.
And I'm Amina Lovell. This morning, Pope Francis announced more progressive measures for Catholics with a new document published by the Vatican. In it, he encourages members of the Church to be more open and accepting of members of what he calls less traditional families, like single parents, same-sex couples, and Catholics who divorce. Alison Vickerbeck has the story.
In a document that's over 250 pages long called Amoris Laetitia, or The Joy of Love in Latin, Pope Francis writes to Catholics in a very personal and approachable style. Greg Burke, the Vatican spokesman, says he does this to inspire them.
It's a kind of love letter from the Pope. Francis is emphasizing all that's positive and promising in family life without denying all the difficulties.
One of those difficulties? Divorce.
The Pope's urging everyone in the Church to make marriages work, and then, if they don't, to be even closer to the people. No one's excommunicated just because they've been married a second time. Everyone's welcome.
Pope Francis has made his stance on these issues clear in interviews, speeches, and other statements, but this is the first time he has put it together in a major church document.
And in Catholic culture, when a pope says something is okay, you're living in a new world.
John Allen has covered the Vatican for 20 years and is now the editor of Crux, an independent Catholic newspaper. He says, despite the influence this document could have, the Church's official stance on marriage and divorce hasn't changed.
The Church teaching on marriage is remaining the same. Church law on marriage remains the same.
Allen says this text encourages pastors to meet with people privately and look at every case of divorce individually.
And this is not something new under Francis. I mean, without making a fuss about it, this kind of thing goes on all the time in parishes all over the place. I think what is new here is simply that Francis is endorsing that. And encouraging those who do it.
But those encouragements from the Vatican will have to trickle down to individual dioceses.
Of course, there's only so much a pope can do from Rome. Then the question becomes, when they walk into St. Anne's Church around the corner, in Boise, Idaho, or Dubuque, or wherever, next week, what are they going to find?
Up until now, divorced Catholics were often not seen as full participants of the Church. Although the experience varies from one case to the next, some, like Vince Fries, felt like they weren't getting much support.
I went through a divorce 16 years ago. When I turned to the church, there was no resources. I did have a pastor who was quite kind and charitable and told me he'd pray for me, but that was really all he could offer me.
Fries is the author of a book called Divorced Catholics, Now What? and he's been helping other Catholic divorcees for over 10 years. He's optimistic about the publication of this document.
This Pope has raised the awareness of the needs for Catholics who have gone through divorce. This is a significant population in the Catholic Church that has been underserved for a long time.
The challenge going forward for the Church will be how they choose to implement Pope Francis's vision at a more local level. Alison Vickerbeck, Columbia Radio News.
So now from the church to the mosque, Islam and its role in American life has become a flashpoint this campaign season. And many Muslims say they're not happy seeing their religion embroiled in partisan debate.
In New York and around the country, Muslims are mobilizing politically. They're using their votes in increasing numbers to speak for themselves and to show that their viewpoints extend beyond their collective faith. Erin Galaxon has more.
Dr. Farah Abbasi is a cultural psychiatrist who focuses on the mental health of Muslims. She's a practicing Muslim herself and says persistent toxic stress levels are at an all-time high for her clients, and for her too.
I've been here 16 years in this country, and never before I felt this scared or worried for my safety, for my family's safety.
A poll by CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, shows that as many as 3/4 of Muslim Americans say they'll vote this year, up around 20% since the last presidential election.
When they talk about Muslims, not even in terms of like you're talking about some human thing, it's inanimate.
Abbasi says Islamophobia is the number one reason she's voting Democrat, and she's not alone. According to CARE, 70% of Muslims plan to vote Democrat. But they haven't always. Back in 2000,
majority of the Muslims voted for George Bush. A lot of Muslims felt more aligned with Republican Party.
like Oz Sultan. He's a startup strategist and Muslim Republican pundit. Despite the Republican Party's treatment of Islam, Sultan says he's still a conservative.
And the issues for me are fiscal policy, financial reform, small government, states' rights. Those are huge issues that aren't necessarily being contended with, I feel, by the opposing party.
Sultan is sitting in a Harlem cafe with Nida Khan, who he calls his liberal journalist friend.
But we agree on a lot of similar things. Like, I think the social issues are...
Like social issues, the problem of Islamophobia, women's rights,
1% are secular.
but not so much others.
Bernie voters are single-issue voters, okay? So what do I think about Sanders?
That's not true. And I also don't agree that they're, what did you say, lazy voters? Absolutely not. I mean, that's you're entitled to your opinion, but I 100% disagree.
Sultan and Khan do agree responding to the rhetoric about Islam should be a bipartisan issue, and that it's good when anyone, Muslims included, get more engaged in the political process.
Because they're paying attention to policy, they're paying attention to how things impact them on an everyday basis. And at the end of the day, every issue is a Muslim issue. They care about jobs, they care about the economy, they care about healthcare, they care about foreign policy.
When Muhammad Khan goes to protest the New York State GOP gala on Tuesday, he says it won't just be to protest what he calls Donald Trump's insulting comments about Islam and spreading of fear.
We also live in a city where, folks struggle to pay their rent every month, right?
Khan is volunteering with the Muslim Democratic Club of New York to get hundreds more Muslims registered to vote.
We also live in a state that blocks access to higher education for immigrants, right?
Khan says he's planning to vote for Sanders because
Muslim communities have been marginalized, especially over the past couple of decades. For us, incremental change is not satisfactory.
So he'll make calls and go to the mosque around the city this week to get out the vote for the April 19th primary. He says he's optimistic. In Dearborn, Michigan, a city with one of the largest proportions of Muslims in the U.S., voter turnout almost doubled this year.
I think you'll see similar numbers in New York, inshallah.
If Allah wishes it. Erin Galaxon, Columbia Radio News.
Hey, Susie, have you checked your WhatsApp this week?
I have, Amina. It says the messages are now secured with end-to-end encryption.
Yeah, that's because WhatsApp just announced that it's tightening security on all its platforms, encrypting all communication for its more than 1 billion users. That means no one can eavesdrop on private messages sent via the service. So that's no hackers, no government entities, not even WhatsApp. Justin Kapos, a computer security expert at NYU, talked to me about how the encryption works and what it means.
So if you think about a mailman, if you send a postcard, then the mailman can see what you're writing to your friend. And that's a somewhat similar way to the way that really most communication protocols, they usually work in that way, where the server, who's the mailman in my analogy, gets to read what's being transmitted. And WhatsApp has designed a system that makes it so that they're not able to see it. So it's like putting the messages that users send inside of envelopes.
How can we be sure that that works?
Well, you don't really know that the code that they've implemented is completely flawless. However, they've worked with known computer security experts, and the protocol library that they're using is open source and available for security experts to review. I do also want to say that this is very preferable to them not making this information available. If they hide the implementation and make it private, then you really have no idea if they've built in a backdoor for, the NSA or the Chinese government or other groups like this. So the fact that they've gone and made at least this protocol library available is a really positive step.
Going back to the government, the FBI asked Apple to help them access the San Bernardino phone, and they said no. But if the FBI were to ask WhatsApp, they couldn't because of these backdoors that you mentioned, that there aren't any of them. So if they can't do this, then what does this mean, moving forward?
So what WhatsApp is doing is they're trying to take themselves out of the equation in terms of the communication security between two users. Even if WhatsApp themselves is compelled by the government to go and turn over communications, they're trying to make this so that this is not possible.
Is there any risk with that?
To the end users, there really isn't any risk. It does make it harder for governments to intercept communications.
So there was a leak last night of a proposed encryption law. Does that mean that the government can ask them to undo the things that they've done?
What this is more likely to mean is that groups that want to develop secure applications would do so overseas. And so we would see a lot of very, very bright minds in security and cryptography and so on working for overseas companies and producing technological products for overseas markets. And I don't think that that's certainly something that we want, is to have the best people at designing secure systems be outside of the United States. I think we'd like to keep that talent in-house.
So what are the government's objectives for pushing this, do you think?
They want to be able to monitor everything everywhere all the time. Certainly that's FBI and NSA and other groups have really made that, be in the forefront of their mission. And, they view that as we're trying to protect America from its adversaries, but sometimes the ways that they attempt to do this can have unintended negative consequences if not done appropriately.
What does this mean for other applications moving forward?
Well, I hope that this will cause other companies to really look at and think about whether or not they should be doing this. I expect that there will be a lot of other applications that will implement and integrate something very similar to what WhatsApp has done. And so I really hope that it will improve the security and privacy of Internet users worldwide.
Great. Justin Kapos, computer security expert at New York University. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Baseball's back, and Sunday's season opener was a reprise of last year's World Series. The Kansas City Royals beat our very own New York Mets.
And even before this Sunday's game started, the Mets had to watch the Royals receive the championship trophy. And here's what's crazy. As Elizabeth Brockway reports, that moment, that was captured the next morning on a baseball card.
When the Topps Company in Brooklyn started selling baseball cards 65 years ago, it was mostly a ploy to get kids to buy candy. Bubblegum specifically. Hard bubblegum.
Depending on how long the cards were at the candy store, some of that gum could crack in half. It wasn't pliable.
That's Michael Bofshever. He's also 65 and from Brooklyn. And he's also my uncle. He grew up buying cards with his dollar allowance from Chadish's, a local candy store. He'd grab a new pack of cards, head outside, and...
You stuff the gum in your mouth, and then you'd shuffle through your cards to see who you got, and you'd read the statistics.
The cards would have a color illustration, or photo on the front, and player's info on the back.
Boy, it was exciting to read about a baseball player's statistics, and then they always used to have like a little fact and a cartoon on the back of the card.
The internet strikes once again. Now, you can find all of this online, and baseball cards are practically obsolete. Enter Topps now. It's a new initiative that Topps launched earlier this week. Michael Linkins is the associate art director at Topps.com. He says they're aiming for a fresh take on a classic.
What's cool about Topps now is it feels more like content and kind of journalism than a traditional baseball card.
Each day, Linkins and his creative team debate what were the most exciting moments in baseball from the day before. They debate the old-fashioned way.
It's a text chain late at night.
They then turn that moment into a card that's available, and collectors take notice, for just 24 hours. It'll be moments like Derek Jeter's final at-bat at Yankee Stadium, the big stuff, at least of the day. And Topps will only print as many cards as you order, so you could end up with a one-of-a-kind card.
I think that's just sort of a bit of a gimmick.
Ian Wennick is in his early 20s and a longtime baseball card collector.
And they're just kind of trying to bank on virality and stuff kind of spreading, hoping people to hop on that bandwagon.
Wennick says he's interested in the traditional baseball cards for the potential investment. And you can make serious money for a few of the uber-rare vintage cards, like the 1909 Honus Wagner. He played shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates back at the turn of the last century. And that card, that went for $1.3 million at a public auction not that long ago. So while the older fans might scoff, 9-year-old hardcore Mets fan and Little Leaguer Avery Rosen says it sounds pretty cool. And when I met him at his after-school program, he said he's been interested in cards since he was given 2 at his first game ever.
And the baseball cards that I got were really, really bad, and so I started collecting.
Now he has almost 2,000. He likes buying packs and searching for the best cards, or more specifically.
Well, my parents buy them for me, but it's usually on a special occasion.
Like when he goes to Mets games with his dad. So when I told him about Topps Now, he could already imagine the moment he'd want to save.
I would want Yoenis Cespedes.
Cespedes is one of the Mets' star players.
To hit a walk-off 2-run homer in the 9th inning to win the game 2-1. Maybe in the playoffs or something. That would be pretty cool.
It can be easy for us to dismiss Topps Now as just a gimmick in our modern digital age. But after all, Topps started making baseball cards as a ploy to sell gum. So anything's possible. Maybe Avery's hopeful card will one day be as valuable as an Honus Wagner. Elizabeth Brockway, Columbia Radio News.
You know who's next up to bat? Women. Today was the last day of the Women of the World Summit, an annual conference dedicated to global women's issues. This year, the focus of the event was balancing family and career, especially relevant because of the new laws around paid leave.
But as reporter Nina Agrawal found out, champions of gender equality in the workforce say we still have a long way to go.
It was a big week for paid family and parental leave. On Monday, Governor Cuomo signed a law that would allow workers to take up to 12 weeks of paid leave to be with a new child or sick parent. On Tuesday, San Francisco's Board of Supervisors passed a bill requiring companies to offer women and men 6 weeks of fully paid parental leave. While some companies already offer paid leave to their employees, the new laws will now apply to everybody in San Francisco and New York State.
Essentially, you don't have to worry about whether you won the boss lottery to get paid family leave.
Sarah Fleischman is Senior Policy Counsel for the National Partnership for Women and Families, a nonprofit that advocates for family-friendly labor policies.
This is particularly important, we know, for low-wage workers who are the ones least likely to have access to these types of benefits through their employer.
New York's new law will be fully implemented in 2021, and Fleischman says the law will be a game changer for employees faced with a difficult trade-off, whether to go back to work or stay at home with their new child. Kim Edwards is an administrative nursing supervisor in Hempstead, Long Island. She's been a single parent her whole life. She says her employer offers paid leave, and for her, that was critical.
It was the best feeling in the world to know that I had a choice in the matter because it gave me the opportunity to take care of my son, do the things that I needed to do, and return to the workforce.
The new laws provide 6 weeks of leave in San Francisco and 12 weeks in New York.
That period, that little infant is only 4 months old or 3 months old.
That's PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi speaking at the Women in the World Summit earlier today.
What are we supposed to do? Just drop the baby at home and home alone and go to work? It doesn't work. So we have to figure out how can they come back to work quickly, but we can ease them in and then allow them to also have the time with the kids.
Like offering on-site daycare, something Nooyi has proposed at Pepsi. On stage with her today was Anne-Marie Slaughter, a former State Department official and Princeton dean. Almost 4 years ago, Slaughter published an electrifying article in The Atlantic called Why Women Still Can't Have It All.
I don't like to think of it in terms of having it all, but can women and men have wonderful careers and strong families at the same time? Absolutely. Do we still need to make a revolution in our cultural attitudes, our workplaces, and our government policies to get there? Absolutely.
Nui and Slaughter discuss solutions like building more real estate to accommodate multi-generational families and changing society's expectations about what's okay in terms of work-life balance. Elizabeth Bonaparte was in the audience at the conference. She said she never had children.
It was just too hard to accommodate my career and motherhood.
For future workers hoping to achieve both, she says paid family leave is one thing that will make it easier. Nina Agarwal, Columbia Radio News.
Talking about achieving work-life balance, commentator Sandukani Murazi struggles to cope with the expectations of her family with her expectations for herself. She's finishing up her MS degree, but her family thinks she should have another degree on her agenda, her MRS, or Mrs. degree.
A month into my stay in the US, I finally got to FaceTime with my grandmother back in South Africa, where I'm from. She asked me how everything was going, how I was settling in, and then she had a few things to get off her chest. For background, you should know I'm a student at Columbia J School, and this is my 3rd academic degree. So my gran was like, Shandu, you went to Rhodes University. You came back empty-handed. You went to Wits University. Again, you came back empty-handed. And so now you're at Columbia. You're in a whole new country. You need to catch a wake up. Get a man. I'm 26 years old, and apparently there's a clock ticking, and it's counting down the time until I become someone's wife, because then and only then will I actually have achieved something in my life. You're probably thinking, no ways, she's got to be exaggerating. But literally every time I speak to someone from home, they want an update on my relationship status. And it's always, and how's the man? Followed by me saying, well, unfortunately, that hasn't worked out. And then they'll say, hayi ngwana washo, no bareliwango. Which means you really have failed. It's a little more intense a phrase in my mother tongue. The thing is, on the most part, I think it's harmless banter, but on some level, they're serious. My mom says our society teaches us that a woman is not successful until she has a man by her side. I mean, women who don't get married by 30 are referred to as mucherukwa. No such word exists for men because nobody cares when they get married. I'm kind of glad I have her to back me because she's more interested in me getting my PhD than anything else. The thing is, it's not that I don't want to get married. I do. I'm just not in any rush to settle down. I still want to be selfish for a while. I want to travel on a whim and think about how my plans affect me and only me. I want to start a family when I am ready and not when everyone expects me to. And please don't worry about my biological clock. I'm not. Seriously though, with 2 months left in the city, I can safely say it's not like I didn't try. I've been on so many dating sites, my thumb has carpal tunnel from all that swiping left and right. I've done everything the rom-coms told me would help me find Mr. Right. I've frequented coffee shops all over the city. I've jogged in the parks in my cutest exercise gear, hoping someone would deliberately bump into me and look me dead in the eye and want to make babies with me on the spot. I've taken walks in Central Park, and I've read a book on the subway with the sexiest look of concentration, hoping some young man would imprint on me. You know, like the wolves on Twilight. There's only one thing I haven't done yet, and my sister says this is why I'm single. I haven't been to the top of the Empire State Building and stood at the window gazing wistfully at the city below. And maybe subconsciously, I'm too afraid to try that one last thing because then I really will have failed. I guess I'll have to leave an Ivy League university with one of the most coveted degrees in the world, but still no man. Sorry, Granny.
Shandok and his family will be waiting with bated breath at the airport in June, hoping to see her appear with a dashing young man. And you may have heard praise for Eric Carle, the popular children's book illustrator and author of over 70 books, including the well-known The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Carle's the subject of a new exhibit at the Hyde Museum of Art in Atlantic, Georgia, that opened this past weekend.
Reporter Jakai Johnson heads to the exhibit to tell us how an artist makes the leap from the pages of children's books to a museum wall.
Michelle Jackson works with the Atlanta First Day School, a private school in Atlanta. She says Eric Carle's books teach lessons. Her takeaway from The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which chronicles the journey of a caterpillar in the days before going into its chrysalis, is really a story about how to reinvent yourself and go through a little hurt to become a better person.
It kind of has a life lesson. It's been one of the best ways I've been able to kind of teach children.
She says his books are popular with teachers as a way to teach basic skills to kids.
They can break down colors, identifying colors, strengthening colors. They can count because every time the caterpillar eats something, it's addition.
Carle isn't just beloved by teachers, children, and parents. Virginia Swooney is a co-curator of the exhibit at the Hyde Museum of Art. She says his work is museum-worthy.
These are incredibly skilled works of art. I mean, we could look at the butterfly over here.
As Swooney points to his work on the walls, the details, the colors, and the thought that went into his paintings stand out.
So I'll just tell you a little bit about Eric Carle's technique. He starts with blank white sheets of tissue paper, and he paints them with beautiful abstract patterns using acrylic paint.
It's not just, which would be enough, an artist who has moral messages, who creates beautiful works that spans generations, but that he's integrally interwoven into history.
Emily Webb teaches art history at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, known as SCAD. Eric Carle was born in New York to German parents. When he was 6, his parents moved him back to Germany. Webb says it was World War II, and it was a dangerous time to be an artist. The Germans looked at artists as degenerates.
Having been in Germany during and after World War II, yes. Right, and being exposed to work that was criminalized and hidden away and destroyed by Hitler and the Nazis, and then to be shown this work and all of a sudden impassioned by something that was so unfamiliar and so strange, that kind of work that was degenerate was the avant-garde.
Chelsea Love is at the exhibit with her 5-year-old twins. She wants to show them the vibrant books and illustrations in person. One of her favorite books is The Mixed Up Chameleon, about a lizard who wants to become like everybody else.
Just teaching them how you're special and you have characteristics unlike anyone else, and the things that you have are special to you, and they are what helps to guide your path.
If you want to find your way to see Carle's work, the exhibit will be on view through December. Jakai Johnson, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Amina Lovell.
And I'm Susie Shea. Some of the world's most powerful people have been using offshore bank accounts to avoid taxes and hide their wealth.
Susie, you must be talking about the Panama Papers.
Yes. The Panama Papers represent the largest number of documents ever leaked to the press at once. In a moment, I'll be speaking with the reporter involved in breaking the story.
And later on, we'll get a warm welcome to Liberland. A group of libertarians have created the world's newest country.
And after 15 years on air, American Idol has heard its last pop song. Before the curtain closes, we'll take a look at the show's impact on American culture.
These stories and more are coming up, but first, the news.
In New York, I'm Henriette Shakar. Earlier today, Pope Francis released a more than 250-page document that offered guidance for a more welcoming church to divorced Catholics. The Pope said Catholics should be guided by their own conscience and not only rules. Belgian authorities say they have arrested a key suspect involved in both the November Paris attacks and last month's attack in Brussels. Erin Galaxon reports.
Belgian authorities say they arrested Mohamed Abrini, one of Europe's most wanted men, at a metro station in Brussels this morning. With Abrini's arrest, French authorities now have in custody 2 key suspects in the November Paris attacks, which left 130 dead. They arrested the other, Salah Abdeslam, weeks ago. Until now, Abdeslam was believed to be the only suspect known to survive in the Paris attack. 2 officials confirmed several arrests but refused to offer details about the ongoing Belgian investigation, which has also involved French anti-terror police. Aaron Glaxon, Columbia Radio News.
Secretary of State John Kerry made an unannounced visit to Iraq today to underscore U.S. support for the Iraqi government as the country's political crisis threatens the fight against ISIS. Kerry met with
It is important to have political stability, and it is important to have a unified and functioning government as rapidly as possible in order to move forward.
Kerry met with Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi as well as with Iraq's foreign minister, the Sunni Speaker of Parliament, and a Kurdish regional leader. He also announced that the U.S. is providing an additional $155 million in aid. Officials are investigating an apparent murder-suicide this morning at Lockland Air Force Base in Texas after an airman shot his commander. Brigadier General Bob Labruta, who oversees the base, says the motive is unclear.
It is not a terrorism situation. It is an active shooter situation, and the investigation will make the determination as to what really occurred.
Labruta declined to identify the 2 men, saying their families must be notified first. A 17-year-old homeless teenager is charged with the murder of University of Texas freshman Haruka Weiser. Police say Mikhail Kreiner was not affiliated with the school. Under Texas law, he will be charged as an adult. Weiser was a dance student from Oregon. Her body was found behind the university's alumni center near the campus's main football stadium. Italy is recalling its ambassador from the Egyptian capital over the torture and slaying of Italian graduate student in Cairo, Giulio Regeni. The circumstances of his death are still unknown, although Italians suspect Egyptian security forces were responsible. The price of mailing a letter will fall for the first time in nearly a century this Sunday. The Postal Regulatory Commission, which is the independent government agency that oversees the U.S. Postal Service and its pricing, decided to drop the cost of postage stamps from 49 to 47 cents. Partly cloudy this afternoon with chilly temperatures in store for tonight. Tomorrow, there's a good likelihood for precipitation and snow. Henriette Chakar, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Susie Xie.
And I'm Amanda Lovell. This weekend, a massive international story broke, the Panama Papers. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, in partnership with news outlets around the globe, began publishing articles about offshore accounts and how some of the world's most powerful people use them to hide their wealth.
The project is based on 11.5 million leaked documents from Mossack Fonseca, a Panama-based law firm. The leak is unprecedented, and it is the largest collaboration between journalists, 400 total. Will Fitzgibbons is a reporter for the ICIJ and has worked on this project from the very beginning. He's on the line with us to talk about the impact of the Panama Papers so far. Will, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
These stories were published on Sunday. But you've been working on this project for an entire year. What has this past week been for you and your fellow journalists?
I think it's been a mix of relief that we can finally get this off our chest. We can finally talk to our friends and family openly, and they understand why we've been so strange and secretive for the past year. I think there's also lots of excitement, unexpectedly, at how impactful Panama Papers has been so far in so many nooks and crannies around the world. But also a good bit of fear and trepidation still, given that publications remain and given that there are many powerful and well-financed individuals who may not agree that information that we've published is truly in the public interest.
And speaking of these figures, the leak exposes the offshore holdings of 12 current and former world leaders. And there has been some fallout in countries such as Iceland, where the prime minister resigned. But what about the United States? How come so few Americans have been named in this investigation?
I think the fact that there haven't been high-profile or politically connected Americans reflects the fact, at least according to many experts I've spoken to, that America is in and of itself a tax haven. We may not think about it because it doesn't have palm trees, but states like Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada are equally easy, if not easier, than many other places we think of where individuals can go and incorporate companies. I would say, of course, that there are thousands of American addresses and names that other partners have found in the files, and the fact that they simply aren't related to political parties doesn't necessarily mean that they're not worth reporting on. It just means that they haven't been highlighted in this phase of the reporting.
So you say there might be thousands, and some argue that it would be good to release these records to the public in order to assist with the news gathering process. What are your thoughts on that?
ICIJ will be releasing in a few weeks' time an enormous data set of all the 214,000 companies that were incorporated by Mossack Fonseca, along with significant company-related individuals, so shareholders and certain directors and other. That will become an enormously useful resource for journalists, for investigators, and for public officials as the public interest in cracking down on the offshore world continues to grow.
Now, about the public interest, say I'm an average New Yorker who doesn't have an offshore account. Why should I care about this leak?
I think Panama Papers is incredibly important to anyone from New York to Kigali in Rwanda. What we see time and time again in Panama Papers is that those people with money and political connections can play by different rules. You can, and we see it quite literally in many cases, write to an offshore law firm and ask to pay a different tax rate, and you can easily receive help for just a few $1,000s to create a new company and benefit in a way that the average Joe Blow in the street in Manhattan can't.
So you're an investigative journalist. From your perspective, what would make this endeavor a successful one?
I think success can be judged on a number of levels. I think we are very satisfied by the fact that this has been such a journalistic achievement so far. The efforts of getting 400 journalists from 70 different countries to work together to respect an embargo and to more or less keep stum for months and months and up to a year is a pretty amazing feat, and one that we look forward to repeating again. And I think now, in terms of concrete steps, really the lid has been blown open, and not to mix metaphors, but now the ball is in the court of those entities, namely governments and international organizations that have the power to decide whether or not they will finally crack down on the offshore world and the violations that experts and many others know have been facilitated through them.
That's Will Fitzgibbon with the International Consortium Investigative Journalists, the group that released the Panama Papers. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Will.
My pleasure. Thank you.
2 weeks from Tuesday, New York City voters will have their chance to weigh in on the presidential primary. But that's not the only race that will happen in New York on April 19th. It's also a special election to fill the seat of former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver. Silver was once one of the most powerful politicians in Albany, but he was convicted last November on 7 counts of corruption. Reporter Stephen Bashaha went to the Lower East Side to see how Silver's influence is being felt in the race to replace him.
Alice Cancel is leaving a campaign event at the Henry Street Settlement House. She sees Willie Rivera, a retired community activist in the Lower East Side.
I am doing so good. I am so rooting for you.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
Alice Cancel is the Democratic nominee for State Assembly District 65. The district covers most of the Lower East Side of Manhattan, all of Chinatown, and the Financial District. Cancel was a district leader for the Democrats and worked closely with Silver over the last 2 decades.
Did I have to work with Sheldon Silver like I had to work with other elected officials? Absolutely. Just to make sure that our district got taken care of.
Her challengers, Yulene Niu and Richard Chang, say Cancel is a Silver loyalist, one that the Democratic Party hand-picked. She rejects the hand-picked idea, but recently called Silver a hero for the district, something Willie Rivera agrees with.
Can't say nothing bad about this man. This man was good all the way around.
Again, that's Sheldon Silver he's talking about, the man at the center of one of the biggest corruption scandals in New York history.
I've known people that done worse, and they're still there,
Rivera isn't alone in this opinion. There are plenty in the Lower East Side who have soured on Silver, but Rivera says Silver's influence in the district still runs deep.
We were blessed to have him. He wasn't the Band-Aid. He was the surgeon.
Ed Litvak is the editor of The Lowdown, a hyper-local news site that covers the Lower East Side.
People feel that he was there for them, that when you had a pothole on your block, a letter from the Speaker of the New York State Assembly to the Department of Transportation tended to get things done.
Silver was convicted on all charges last November in a multi-million-dollar corruption case, everything from money laundering to extortion. In the nearly 40 years he was in office, Silver wielded his power and the more than $1 million budget in constituent services liberally in his district. He got low-income housing for the elderly and fought for funding to keep businesses in Lower Manhattan after 9/11. Again, Ed Litvak.
People are now going to have to come to terms with not being sort of in this special situation that the Lower East Side has been in for so many years.
In this heavily Democratic district, Alice Cancell's main contender is Yu-Lin Yu. On Tuesday morning, she's handing out flyers right outside the F train stop on East Broadway.
It's pretty freezing right now. We were just giving out lit over there, but wanted to get my crew some coffee.
Yu knows how things work in Albany. She's been chief of staff for Assemblyman Ron Kim and says she knows how to deal with the deep cuts the district is facing.
One of the things that we have to do is to make sure that we can staunch that bleed right away and also to be able to provide constituent services on day one.
Yu's already gone up against Alice Cancell and lost the Democratic nomination. That was last month, and a last-minute switch to the Working Families Party allowed her to stay in the race. Dick Dady is the executive director of Citizens Union, a good government group in New York City. He says special elections like this are structured so the party bosses have the most influence.
What we have here is more or less a coronation and less an election.
What New does have are loads of endorsements, including one from Comptroller Scott Stringer. But according to Ed Litvak from The Lowdown, the politician shaping this race the most is still Sheldon Silver.
For Alice Cancell, her perceived connection to Sheldon Silver is going to help her, but I do think that there are reform-minded people who just the idea that she could be connected to him is going to turn them away from her.
Silver's legacy in Albany will forever be tainted by corruption, but in this corner of Lower Manhattan, at least for this one election on April 19th, Silver is still a political force impossible to ignore. Stephen Bisaha, Columbia Radio News.
If you fly into or out of Newark Airport, more flight options and cheaper airfares may be in your future.
The Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, says it's loosening restrictions on the number of flights taking off and landing at the New Jersey airport. Daniel Rustos has more from the tarmac.
It's 6:30 in the morning at Newark Airport, one of New York City's main travel hubs. Terminal A is basically empty. Terminal B is full of employees, but not too many passengers. So, where are all the passengers?
The next stop is Terminal C. Airlines serving Terminal C are United Express, United International.
Yep, Terminal C, the United Airlines terminal, is packed. And there's a good reason United's terminal is so much busier than the other two. Since 2008, the federal government has imposed what's called a slot system on Newark Airport to cut down on delays. That means only a certain number of flights could take off and land. Under the current system, United Airlines owns the vast majority, 3/4 of the slots at Newark. But that's about to change. The FAA announced this past weekend that it's getting rid of those slot controls. Why? Well, despite the crowds you heard at Terminal C, delays at the airport are down over 30% since 2007. The FAA says Newark doesn't need them anymore. So, what does that mean for the passengers and airlines at Newark Airport? Seth Kaplan, the editor of a travel industry blog called Airline Weekly, says no slot controls means more airlines can enter United's turf. They can operate as many flights as the airport can handle, and with more competition...
In the end, it's supply and demand economics, and if you have the same number of people who want to fly, but more airline seats out there, airfares would come down. And most other airlines, aside from United, would benefit.
Carriers like Southwest and JetBlue have been pushing for more access to Newark for years. And they just might get it. But Kaplan says it won't be a free-for-all. If you get rid of a traffic cop and traffic gets bad, you put the cop back.
So, they're trying to walk a line here and, give consumers as much air service as they can, give airlines a chance to provide the services that they want, but nobody wants delays of an unacceptable nature.
Industry experts pointed out that United is still so well established at Newark, it can go ahead and add flights too. But once those slot controls go away, customers looking for frequent flyer miles or cheaper prices may go elsewhere. Shana Lawson is a travel consultant at Valerie Wilson Travel, and she says losing control of Newark could put a serious dent in United's business.
For me and for anyone that travels, which we have a ton of corporate travelers, if they want to leave out of Newark, they know United and they don't care. They're like, yeah, United, put me on United Newark. If they start to see like, oh, there's Delta and AA, oh, well, yeah, do Delta instead. United is just going to...
United Airlines didn't respond to requests for comment. Southwest says it's carefully monitoring the situation at Newark, but hasn't yet released its plans. In a statement, the FAA said it's making these changes at Newark to improve competition in the country's most in-demand airspace. Carriers will still need to find gates in the airport terminal, like any other non-slot-controlled airport. The Port Authority, which owns all of the city's airports, said it welcomes the removal of slot controls. The changes come into effect in October, and depending on how things go, the FAA says it might get rid of slot controls at JFK as well, meaning travelers across the city may have a little more choice and a little more cash starting this fall. Daniel Rostis, Columbia Radio News.
And if you do find yourself at Newark Airport looking for a new travel destination, you may consider Liberland. It's a new country that sits in the middle of the Danube River, a small island between Serbia and Croatia.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, that's because this micronation is new. Adele Humbert spent time with Liberland's president and founder here in New York, who's celebrating the country's first anniversary.
It's a rainy Tuesday night in Manhattan. At a noisy bar a few steps away from Grand Central Station, 4 friends are sitting down over beers and having a very special discussion. The representatives of Liberland gathered for their monthly meeting to do a little nation building.
We have a set of goals and set of things that we got to reach out to. We got to build the team again because some people are leaving.
That's Xenophon Kontouris. The 23-year-old Greek entrepreneur is the head of the Liberland office in New York. He has big plans for his future adopted country.
We are working on helping them out through our presence here in New York, the capital of the world and near the United Nations.
But starting a country from scratch is not easy, and the 4 representatives know there is a long way to go before the Liberland can find a place at the UN. For now, Liberland is just a theory, a tiny teardrop-shaped island in the Danube River, between Serbia and Croatia.
It is a beautiful piece of nature at this stage. It has a long 600-meter sandy beach.
That's Vít Jedlička, a Czech libertarian politician. Almost a year ago, on April 13, he proclaimed himself president of the Free Republic of Liberland. It is still a no man's land, but he can already visualize his future government.
There is one house on which will be a seat of government, which is a very small house, but we like that because our government will also be very small.
Though it lies between Croatia and Serbia, it isn't clear which country owns it. Jedlička saw this ongoing border dispute between the 2 countries as an opportunity to build a new model of governance.
It is a paradise, a fiscal paradise, but we would like to create also a social paradise.
As a confirmed libertarian, Jedlička imagines a political system where freedom would be the only rule.
We believe that state should be limited, that the idea about voluntary taxes is a good one, that the state would only regulate very necessary things like proliferation of nuclear weapons or drug trafficking and stuff.
That's the idea anyway, but a state is more than just a state of mind. Michael Doyle is a professor in international law at Columbia University. He says you need 4 key ingredients to build a state.
It's not a recipe or a formula. It's a set of principles as to what constitutes a state. You need a territory, you need a population, you need a government, and you need recognition from other states.
1 year after its self-establishment, no other country has officially recognized the Liberland. And the people who've tried to move to Liberland have been removed by Croatia. But still, more than 400,000 people have already registered for the citizenship online. For now, the president can rely on his supporters in New York to build a credibility for his future country. These are the first measures of the future national anthem of Liberland. Alexander Lieberman, one of the representatives in New York, has offered to write the anthem.
The president gave me total freedom. He said, let your inspiration go.
Lieberman won't be finished in time for the anniversary, but he's promised to release what he has so far on social media next week. And as for Jelika, he'll be commemorating the founding of Liberland just across the river from his would-be homeland at a hotel in Croatia. Adèle Lambert, Columbia Radio News.
When Governor Andrew Cuomo signed new legislation this week raising the state minimum wage to $15 an hour, not all low-wage workers were included. One group was left out, people who work for tips. Tipped workers in New York got their own raise at the end of last year to $9 an hour.
Reporter Tyler Pratt found many advocates in service still don't think that's nearly enough.
Harlem Barbecue is going off at 4:30 in the afternoon. It's a neighborhood restaurant on Lenox and 137th Street with inexpensive southern food like smoked ribs and mango jerked chicken wings and a whole bunch of colorful frozen drinks, all paired with loud hip-hop music. And the waitstaff, they seem to be enjoying working there. Even so, they still have to hustle for tips.
Sometimes in this community it's kind of tough.
Andre Stewart is the general manager and co-owner of Harlem Barbecue.
Servers will go to a table, they might give tremendous service, and the check might be $95, and they leave $100 and say thank you very much.
Stewart remembers the struggles of being a waiter. He says he'd like to pay his servers more, but worries that since the restaurant is in a low-income community, raising prices to pay for higher wages might put him out of business. So when his servers get stiffed, he says he tries to make it up out of his own pocket. And sometimes he even goes and talks to the tables.
The tips is really what they rely and depend on in order to feed their families. So the service was poor. That's one thing. Let us know that the service is poor. But if it wasn't the fact of service, can you please make sure that, in the kindness of your heart, you just tip them.
Not everyone thinks this responsibility should be the customers. Saru Jayaraman is a national restaurant employee advocate. In between dropping her kids off at school and heading up the Food Research Center at the University of California at Berkeley, she says servers need to be paid more.
We are at a fork in the road in the restaurant industry in the U.S. and really as a nation.
Jayaraman is also the author of a new book, Forked, about the split between restaurants where customers are expected to tip and the ones where the tip comes built into the price of a meal.
There are plenty of restaurants taking what we call the high road to profitability, providing livable wages and working conditions, but it's not the standards followed by the chain restaurants that employ the bulk of workers in the industry.
Now, a few high-end New York restaurants are trying out no-tip meals, but it's not something a lot of smaller restaurants are doing, at least yet. And for now, they don't have to. New York's new minimum wage hike doesn't apply to restaurant servers.
It unfortunately leaves out almost 300,000 tipped workers, 70% of whom are women, and they are the poorest women in the state and the United States.
And Jayaraman says this causes more problems for women. It subjects them to sexual harassment. Shanita Thomas agrees. She's been working in restaurants for 11 years. And while on her train to work in the Bronx, she remembers one experience particularly well.
This is a funny story. Like, this one particular guy, he used to come to a restaurant often, and he would have his coffee, and, I would serve him, and then he would be like, oh, hey, big titty black girls, you got enough milk in them jugs for my coffee? And I'm like, whoa. So I would tell my manager, he was like, oh, don't worry about it. That's Larry. He's our regular customer.
Thomas says these interactions made her feel helpless.
When we're working for tips, you feel like you can't go and tell your boss anything because you're going to say something, they're going to come and say something to the customer, and 9 times out of 10, they're not going to leave you any tip.
Thomas doesn't wait tables anymore. Now she says she makes more money with a new job as a manager at Yankee Stadium, where her train is headed. She still has to deal with customers, but she says at least they don't control her income, which happens to be $15 an hour, what the new minimum wage in New York will be in a few years. And is $15 enough?
Hell no. I'm sorry, excuse my French. I'm not even going to hold you. It's really not enough because when the rent is like $1,500, then you have to worry about transportation, then you have to worry about utilities, phone bills. So me making, even if I do have, $15 an hour, I can just make it.
New York's still going to have a lower wage for tipped workers, at least for a while. With the state budget already locked in, it doesn't appear there will be any more wage increases on the horizon. So for now, the only 15 servers can hope to see is at least 15% at the end of a meal. Tyler Pratt, Columbia Radio News.
The old saying goes, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But commentator Katie Ferguson wishes her generation, millennials, would forget that conventional wisdom.
I'm going to tell you what will happen to me and my classmates at the end of this show. When it's over, after the host says, thanks for listening. After the mics are turned off, we gather and talk about this show, the one that's happening right now. What went well and what didn't. We go through each piece one by one. It takes a long time, and it can be brutal. But to me, the criticism isn't the worst part. The worst part is the praise. They, and I don't really know who they are, but it seems like everyone from psychologists to trend pieces in the style section of the New York Times, they say that my generation, millennials, thrive on praise. I hate that word, millennials, a catch-all, as if one made-up term can broach the differences and idiosyncrasies of so many people just because they fall within a certain age range. But fine. We've been told too many times that we were special, given too many trophies as kids, like the ones from my childhood soccer leagues. I don't know which games we won and which ones we lost. Everyone got a participant trophy. Everyone won. Those trophies still decorate my bedroom back home. They're still shiny, if a bit ridiculous to look at. A bulbous soccer ball soaring out on a trail of shooting stars. But they're really just cheap plastic. That's not what I wanted then, and it's not what I want now in graduate school. I'm a beginner, and so much of what I make now is bad. Some good ideas, but not quite there yet. I cringe thinking about how all of it, the first interviews I ever did, the first radio pieces, all of the mistakes I've made, will live on the internet forever. I cringe thinking that someone will find this. Like going through a pile of laundry before it's clean and folded, crisp. And being praised just for the effort doesn't feel good to me. Maybe that's because that's not how I was raised. When I was growing up, my parents didn't tell my sister and I that we were special. They didn't sugarcoat what we weren't great at. When I was little, I wanted to be a ballerina. I loved the light pink leotards and shoes. But I only took a year of lessons in a room that smelled of chlorine above our community pool. And I never knew why the lessons stopped until a few days ago. My mom told me it was obvious. I was clumsy, not graceful, couldn't keep a rhythm. And she wanted to encourage me to do what I was good at. But for the things I was good at, the praise that came from my parents was often nonverbal. They didn't say much at all. But it's their actions that I remember. They were always there, every soccer game, every play, everything. Even if it was bad. They didn't need to tell me I was special because it didn't matter if I was. And that made it easier to try the things I was afraid of, the things I might not be good at. Without the pressure of praise, we were allowed to fail, allowed to be unsatisfied, allowed to try to make it better next time. Still, I worry about this aversion to praise sometimes. But I was coming home from school a few nights ago and found myself waiting for the F train in Brooklyn. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard it. Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On. That song from Titanic. I peered around the pillar I was leaning against and saw a little boy, maybe 8, sitting at a keyboard, hands barely big enough to play those sweeping chords. He wasn't perfect, but he was pretty good. I should know, because I used to play that song when I was around the same age. And just above his left shoulder, tapping the beat to himself on his leg, was his dad. Just there. As I got on the train, I wondered what that dad would tell his kid as they packed up to go home. If he would tell him how well he played, how special he is, if he would shower him with praise, or if he would choose the quieter option, the one I grew up with. And I hoped it would be the latter.
Katie Ferguson contemplated rewriting every sentence of this commentary, but she lived with it. Since 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement has placed a spotlight on the volatile relationship between law enforcement and Black Americans across the country.
Its nationwide protests have pushed race relations to the top of national conversations. Now local educators are taking action with what they call the first ever teach-in, coordinated by Pratt Institute students and faculty. The on-campus event is meant to tackle some of the issues raised by the Black Lives Matter movement. Oliver Arnaldi reports.
In a packed auditorium, Professor Uzma Rizmi reads out a list of names.
Trayvon Benjamin Martin, February 26, 2012. Anthony Dwayne Harris, 28th January 2013. Kyla Moore, 13 February 2013.
This is the opening of a 2-day teach-in, and the names go on for another 25 minutes. Around 100 students, faculty, and community members listen on. These are the names of the hundreds who've died at the hands of law enforcement in the last 3 years. They are the victims who inspired Black Lives Matter, a national protest movement begun in 2013. Now, Pratt Institute is bringing together activists, intellectuals, artists, and teachers for a 2-day teach-in on their Brooklyn campus.
I really want it to be more global discussion, not just in Pratt, but when these kids leave here, to talk about it when they go home.
Donna Gorslin is a dean at Pratt and organised the teach-in. For Gorslin, the issues are broad and wide-ranging. Police violence, of course, but also inclusion at an institution that hasn't always been so welcoming.
There are very few African American students on campus. We only had our first African American woman tenured professor 5 or 6 years ago. We're in Brooklyn in a middle-class black neighborhood. It doesn't really make sense.
If Pratt isn't exactly known for its diversity, it is recognised nationally as a school of art and design. The teaching included artistic interpretations of Black Lives Matter. This is student Sonia DiNicolo. What are we looking at here?
I have made white privilege bar soap. The logo itself is an angry man and an angry woman's face. The ingredients include anger, entitlement, tears, projection, and denial.
Adia Wingfield, a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, says teach-ins like this one show that race is still an issue for the younger generation.
I think that we may be inclined to some degree to overstate the extent and degree to which young people may be past some of the racial issues that persist and continue to plague our country.
Pratt student DiNicolo would likely agree.
Being silenced is the main form of control, and talking about it takes that away.
Pratt's 2-day teach-in, featuring workshops and lectures, wraps up tomorrow. Oliver Arnoldi, Columbia Radio News.
After 15 seasons, American Idol took its final bow.
Last night, about 9 million people tuned in to watch the series finale of the televised singing competition. And as Adrienne Ma reports, even though the show's numbers have dwindled in recent years, it's left a lasting mark on popular culture.
In the spring of 2002, hundreds of aspiring crooners and divas tried out for a yet unknown talent competition called American Idol, hoping to hear these words.
You're going to Hollywood, baby.
You are coming to Hollywood. Welcome to Hollywood. Of course, most of them heard this instead.
I think I'm going to have to say no, dude.
I don't think it's right for the competition.
I think you just killed my favorite song of all time.
For those who made it, tens of millions of Americans tuned in, launching American Idol into television history. Since it began, Idol has turned out both bona fide superstars like Kelly Clarkson, as well as some memorable flops.
She bangs, I'm
Thank you.
wasted by the way
Thank you. You can't sing, you can't dance, so what do you want me to say?
At its peak, the show brought in nearly 40 million viewers. But this past season, the viewership was about a fifth of that. Even though that still makes it a top 20 show, Steve Johnson, a culture critic for the Chicago Tribune, says,
the trend line for Idol was so clearly down that I think probably just felt a little sad to everybody, and they wanted to move on to something else when they kept looking at the ratings numbers not going up.
Michael Slezik is an American Idol obsessive who covers the show for TVLine.com.
I've seen every episode since season 1. From the premiere to the finale. Never missed an episode in my life.
But even he agrees with Johnson. He says even though
most networks would kill to have a new show draw that kind of number,
it was probably time for Idol to take a break.
You know, all good things must come to an end. You know, and in the TV world, 15 seasons is a really long time.
Still, Slezik says he'll miss the sense of community around the show. He says in a world of YouTube, Facebook, and Netflix, there aren't that many cultural experiences that most people can share.
I'm a little sad. There's a nostalgic part of me that maybe we could have found a few more great singers before it was all said and done. I could have gone another 5 seasons for sure.
And Slezik may just get his wish. At the end of last night's finale, host Ryan Seacrest planted a seed for a possible return, signing off, "Good night, America," for now. Adrienne Ma, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Nadal Humbert. Leading our staff of reporters were senior producer Dilda Tikarli.
Director Katie Ferguson coordinated our studio production with Tyler Pratt and Elizabeth Brockway.
Our web team, Jeffrey Bernard and Jakai Johnson, got the stream live to the web. Shandukari Mulauzi produced the news, senior editor Laura Gamba, and assistant editor Isabella Kokarni led our copy team.
Our instructors Kerry Donahue, Danielle Aracon, Sally Herships, and Matt Collette advised our staff. I'm Amina Lovell.
And I'm Susie Shia. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4 p.m. Until next time, you can always find us online at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.